There
Are
we
you
go.
ready?
We're ready, and we can just start talking. And
I got involved in this by a,
tell us your name.
my name is Larry Mullen
Hi, Larry.
out of VA-86. We were flying the A-7 Charlie, and I have 3 of the pilots with me. I'm with them. They made I believe it was our first Yankee station flight. We had 3 of our pilots and one of an Air Force F-4 FAC, the forward air controller. They used it, and this is, you were lieutenant way back at JG or lieutenant?
That's probably JG when I joined the squadron.
This is Lieutenant JG Arthur Borne.
Yeah,
Art
Ward.
AJ. He didn't get shot down. He got to stay around. There were 4 flights, 4 in the flight, 3 of them were A3s. Our skipper, who is normally here, he's not this day, his commander, Yankee. He was commanding a flight, and the F4 was giving them instructions. And I don't know how much can be told or should be told, but I'm not one of the pilots. I happen to be the avionics.
It's online, so you can tell everything.
I was the avionics division chief, so I got to get most of the stories from them. I was also the one that would debrief all the flights coming in. We were, like I say, we were flying A6 Charlies, and we had just come off of a med cruise.
A7.
A7, not A6s, A7s. We had just come off of a flight, Westpac, no, wrong again, from the Atlantic. We had just come back from a cruise with A7 Echoes. They decided that because the A7 Echo engines were falling apart, that we weren't going to be able to go on our Westpac cruise. We were going to go with A6 Charlies. A7 Charlies. I just don't want to give us the right airplane. It had a bum engine that was falling apart. They tracked the whole event to, I believe, is an installer of a O-ring on the TF-41 aircraft engine. So they downed all the A7 Echoes, and they gave us 12 airplanes. We got 12 airplanes from 174.
I thought we went to war with 5 and they flew the rest
Oh
of
yeah,
them.
they
That's true.
kept bringing them over. We didn't get all of our airplanes except while we were on our way to the Westpac. We had all our airplanes on the day that these guys go out for our first Yankee station shoot 'em up. The only part I had in any of this was I was the feller that went down to VA 174, met whichever pilot was flying the airplane, got a complete debrief from the airplane, and our instructions were we had complete control, we could control anything and everything that they repaired, that they were to fix. They'd go flying, he'd write out a worksheet, I'd look at it. The chief that was on there at the time was Bob Beasley. Him and I had happened to be good friends in Memphis. And he would hand me the debrief sheet. I'd say, okay, Bob, we need number 1, number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fixed. He said, come on, Larry, you know we can't do that. I said, no, I know you can. They told me you could. It's the skipper of our squadron and the skipper of his squadron are sitting there saying they're gone. And they're going if you got to take every up A7 out there on the line and give them whatever parts they need to send that. The A7 Echo that we were sending, the Charlies that we were sending had the Echo avionics in it. But the engine was not, it was falling apart.
So you had parts birds to
Yes, we got
pick
parts
from.
birds from them, but they were all system ready. They were flying a 126. I let him, he had the first part, the skipper was commanding the flight that was out of there. And since I didn't fly any of it or know anything about it except what I've heard and learned, because we've learned this before, I'm gonna let him start with his part in the learn. Him and our skipper is not here today. Yeah, but they,
All right.
I've heard them speak, so they have a pretty good it should work well in this. I think we may already be online.
Yeah,
Art,
my
tell
name's
us.
Art Borne. That's Art Airborne was my call sign.
Uh-huh.
Because of that, pretty simple. And yeah, it was early in our deployment to Westpac, and we went out in a formation of 3 airplanes because one of them went down on the deck. It was
Jim
Hall.
Jim Sullivan.
Sullivan. So there were 3 of us, and I was a junior officer, so I was on the skipper's wing, and the F-4 added a name with a full bag of fuel, 2,000-pound drop tank and full wings, and then Dave was on the F-4's left wing, and we had to do that because there was an undercast and we couldn't dive bomb, we couldn't use flares, and so we joined up on the F-4, and he had his pointed feet wet in case something went wrong, which it did. Skipper called for electrical fusing, which means the bombs are armed 30 inches from the rack or so, and we only were supposed to drop those in a dive bomb so you could pull out of the frag envelope before they got together and went off. And nobody caught it that night that he called for electrical fusing. I didn't have the box in my airplane, so I couldn't have chosen it. I couldn't have chosen electrical fusing, so I had to drop mechanical, which is the fuse in the nose that has a propeller that spins up and drops out after 87 times or something. And so I was watching he said, ready, ready, pickle, and I was watching the bombs come off a skipper's airplane. They hadn't all come off yet when there was a great big blast down below the canopy rail, and I just remember it kicked me real hard and everything went black. The only thing was the engine running, I could hear that, but no electronics, no avionics. And so I pulled the ram air turbine and it dropped out and got hydraulic pressure. But before that happened, the F-4 exploded, the gas tank or something exploded immediately, and I thought everybody has a different picture, but I thought it rolled into me and I had to push over and miss it. And after that, I didn't see any lights. I was in the dark, and I kept rolling over trying to see if anybody had see where the F-4 went, and if I saw any ejection seats. I didn't see anything. And so I was talking. So I had everything I needed because the ram air turbine was providing that. And I talked to Dave a little bit. I remember that, and I tried to raise the F-4, and I could hear them talking. Then Gordy and who's the other guy?
Brown was his last name.
The Rio, the guy in the backseat, got hung up in trees with his parachute, and Gordy got on the ground, and I could hear them talking to each other, I think, but I couldn't. They wouldn't answer me. And then Skipper ejected pretty quick while he was still over North Vietnam, and it was dark. And when he came down, he hit his leg on the side of a hill and broke an ankle or something. So really messed his back up. And what I remember him saying was he crawled down through the elephant grass or whatever down to the river and saw the anti-aircraft gun that was shooting at me. Every time I'd come down below the undercast to see if I could see anything, and so I didn't do that very many times. So and the skipper crawled back up the hill and he realized he didn't have his radio. His only connection with civilization was his emergency radio, and this is just what I remember. He found it in the grass. This thing in the grass in the dark. And so he was able to talk to the people that came in. And I was at 4.5 hours that night trying to raise somebody who could send in, rescue. And nobody would ever answer me. And so.
And you were still flying, right?
Yeah, I was still flying.
Yeah.
And I forgot what the legs were on that airplane, but I flew for, 3 hours or something until I finally needed to tank. That's the only time I tanked for real. I tanked a lot just for practice because it's fun hitting the basket, backing out, hitting the basket. Just something to do if you're not on a mission. And so I was talking to Dave, and I kept hearing Crown or somebody kept trying to turn him south to Vietnam, and he said, "No, I'm not doing that," because he knew he was losing fuel. So he flew on out over the water, and then he turned south. And I remember him saying, well, when the gauges reached 0, because we had a real good, accurate capacitance fuel indication system, and he said, "Okay, I'm turning out," and he did. And he said, "Okay, it just flamed out," and then he got ready for ejection, and he ejected. And so I didn't know any more that night. They called me back in, so I went back and landed. And the next morning, I got in my video, I've got a picture of Dave and Skipper getting off the airplane. That night they picked up. You can tell this more, but they picked up Dave first, went back in, and that's a story in itself, just about how the helicopter got burned, went everything out over the water. But, and then they went back in and picked up a skipper. And skipper, when skipper threw him in the airplane because he couldn't walk, he turned around and saw Dave soaking wet, and so both of them came back. They went to Da Nang that night, I guess. So.
Like Art said, I was.
You're Dave.
Yeah.
Dave, tell us your
Dave Anderson.
Dave Anderson.
Yeah. This was early in our combat experience, so I had very limited experience at all before this occurred. And but we had one thing I want to comment on. Before we ever went to combat, we had an officer that was our safety officer, Terry Mullen, and I kind of hated him because he would put these straps on our parachute and hang them down from the roof of the hangar deck and lift us up on the thing and then start slowly letting us down so that we would get a feel for how far off the ocean or the ground to release the parachute. And we did that over and over and over, and I fussed about it then, but I have to say that when I needed it, I've been well trained. As we came in, I was flying on the left wing, and my first sensation, I didn't get the thump that Art got on that, but I did see that the F-4 I thought had gone into burner. Now that figures an F-4 guy, Air Force guy, would try to get out of the area quickly. We didn't have burners, and I was starting to have some things to say about the Air Force pilot when I realized that he was turning into me. And
Now he turned into me.
and being in burner, I had already cobbed my throttle all the way forward, realizing he wasn't in burner when he ejected, and so I was a little messed up.
And you could see everything that was going on.
I could see the F-4 and the lights that we used to stay in formation, and I saw what I thought was burner, what was the flames underneath, and then I did see the 2 ejection seats go. And that's when I realized that he wasn't in burner, and I made one circle, like Art would too, trying to locate where they went down and get that coordinate set up. When I had pulled my rad out, I realized that I was losing fuel. I lost 3,000 pounds of fuel in that one turn. So I realized I needed to head to the beach. We had been briefed before we got there to head 060, and I wasn't going to get talked out of 060 until we got over the water. And like Art said, they encouraged me to turn direct to Da Nang, and I may have made it, or I may have gone down in enemy territory. I knew if I made it to water, a Navy helicopter would come pick me up or something. Anyway, and then they sent an F-4, Air Force F-4, to join in on me, and at the time he was on my wing for a few minutes when I ran out of fuel. In the meantime, you do some crazy things. I realized I was going to eject, and so I stowed everything like Terry Mullen had taught us, and so I knew when I pull the face grip, I'm going to lean back so I won't get a neck injury. And then I also dumbly thought, I'm going to have to write a report about this. So I wanted to keep track of what time I ejected and what time I hit the water. And I ejected at 9:03 and hit the water at 9:17. And I got down to 14,000 feet, which was the target for optimal ejection. And came down, popped the thing, the risers when I should have, when the raft hit the water. Oh, another thing happened. Everybody that I know had ever ejected saves their face curtain for some plaque on the wall. I let mine go. And I was mad at myself, so when I pulled the raft handle, I stuffed it inside, and it's still in my house. Before that, I had a simple little prayer to God. I said, God, you already know whether I'm going to make it or not. If I make it, fine. If I don't, please help my wife and my daughter have a good and safe life. and then I had to get busy back with what I was doing. Got in the water, had a terrible time of getting in the raft. I was afraid my survival knife was gonna puncture the raft, and I don't swim very well, so that raft was very important to me. It took me at least 30 or 40 minutes to get in the raft. In that time, the Air Force guy kept calling me on the radio, and I had to answer his radio call when I was trying to get in the raft. But finally got in the raft and it felt really good. And it took about an hour and a half for the helicopter to get there. They put a PJ in the water. We had been taught to put our D-ring, it's a little snap thing, around the cable so that if we passed out or whatever else, we were gonna get to the airplane. Well, PJ did not hook up my D-ring, and I said, no, we're gonna hook up my D-ring. Hooked my D-ring up, and then the helicopter pilot got vertigo and started water planing us in and out of the water to about 60 knots. Both of us hung on to each other really tight, and finally got lifted into the air and into the helicopter. Pretty soon after I got in the helicopter, they said, do you know how to fire an M60 machine gun? And I said, no. And they said, well, we're gonna teach you, because you're gonna be on the window on the side opposite where they're trying the door. If you see anything that's moving, it's gonna be on the enemy side of the plane, of the helicopter. So the first time you pull the trigger, this pilot, as goosey as he is gonna be at 3,000 feet. So, and that was the peregrine talking to me, and we fired off a few rounds, so I knew that, and he left it all armed, and left me over there at that side of the plane, and I was listening to all the conversations going on, but I sure didn't want to see anything in the weeds. Anyway, they'd gone in to get Pete Yonke, and when they brought him on board, it's still emotional to me to see Pete be a survivor and be in that same helicopter with me. And so we both give a good hug to each other and a prayer of thanks for our survival. The helicopter then took us in to Da Nang, and when we landed, they asked me if I'd like to call my family. I was young. I had no intention of telling my wife that I'd been down. I was gonna, when the war was all over, I was gonna say, you know, oh, by the way, I didn't want you to worry, so I didn't call. Unbeknownst to me, somebody was sending messages. They'd call my wife at 1 o'clock in the morning, and they were sending messages to her telling that a helicopter's going getting him, the helicopter's got him, he's in Da Nang. And she wrote me this letter about, you know, could you have called me? And it took 7 days to get there, so I didn't know she was upset with me for 7 days. And then what am I gonna say in a letter? I didn't want you to worry. That didn't fly very far, by the way. Anyway, that was the story. But I do have, past that incident, the A-7 was a very, very good plane. Even though it was considered underpowered, that's something that we all realized and adjusted to. The avionics were great, except not all the airplanes had avionics necessarily. So if you were in maintenance, the commanding officer got an avionics package complete, the ops officer got an avionics complete, the senior pilots got avionics complete.
I didn't get anything.
We didn't get anything. So I didn't have electric fusing that night either. But it was a very good airplane. Later I'll tell you a little story about my ability as a dive bomber, because it's a kind of interesting story.
So this was perhaps y'all's first or very early mission?
July 17th.
Yeah, it was early in our, I don't know how many missions we had for it, maybe 5 or 6 or something like that.
Okay. All right.
My name is Roy Stockard. I got to the Tonkin Gulf with 400 hours of flight time. And from what I kept a diary of all our missions, and I think we flew about 115 overall, each one of the pilots. we got there, I think, in July, and we stayed through the end of the war in '73, which was January, February. It was declared over. My incident that I want to talk about, I got to give credit to one of our lieutenants, Fred Emil, who taught me how to, after we got to Tonkin Gulf, taught me how to maneuver against surface-to-air missiles. And we, in our training, and my training beforehand, we had dropped bombs and shot guns and from the Gatling gun on the A-7, but we hadn't done any maneuvering against SAMs.
Mhm.
So the incident that I'll tell you about happened on October the 28th, 1972, which actually happened to be my birthday also. And
Coming
I
up here.
Yeah, it's coming up real close again. And I was, we were going on a night mission to launch at midnight. And I was the spare pilot on the deck. And the wingman that was going to fly the mission, his airplane went down, so I ended up launching. And I launched with Commander Jim Hall at that time. And I'd never flown with him before, but we sat through the briefing and I knew what we were going to do. We were going into a town off the coast of Vietnam, south of Van Hoa, about maybe 60 miles or so. An A-6 crew was going in low level to hit a target down on the river there, and our mission was to provide anti-missile, anti-SAM protection. We had Shrike on board, and so we got ashore and set up a racetrack pattern with. We knew where a SAM site was located. We didn't know exactly where it was because it could have been hit beforehand, but we knew about where it was. So one of us in this racetrack pattern was pointed toward the SAM site throughout the mission. So when one turned in, the other one would turn out. So the A-6 went in, and I got to mention one thing, that Commander Hall liked to fly with his top rotator on so that his wingman could see where he was. So I knew where he was throughout the mission almost. So the A-6 goes in and he calls that he's hit the target and he's on his way out. So I was on the inlet heading to the west and turned to the east, and I could see Commander Hall out in front of me. And I was about 14,000, so he was around 10,000, and 10,000 feet. And maybe 3 miles in front of me, maybe 4, I don't know. I could see him clearly above the canopy, the glare shield. And as we had a half moon, so we could see the shoreline easily, and we were only like maybe 15, 20 miles from the shoreline. And so we started to egress, and as soon as we started, both of us pointed toward feet wet, the coastline, they fired 2 missiles at us. And Commander Hall says, 2 SAMs at 12 o'clock. And very calm. He was at a deep voice. His call sign was Cherokee. He was an Indian, Native American background. Anyway, very good guy. So he calls out the 2 SAMs, and then his top rotator light goes out. And I said, oh, it's showtime here. The thing is, our Shrike missiles were made to shoot at radar emission from the radar site that was shooting it. They shot these without the radar on. So they knew, they could probably see us from the reflection of the moon. They knew about where we were. They shot it in that direction, and then we had nothing to shoot at. So I went 30 degrees left, 30 degrees nose down, full power. And when I got to 450 knots, I did what Lieutenant Emil shot me and told me how to do. and it basically was a large barrel roll. Because this sand was coming at Mach 2.5, and I'm doing, I'm not even Mach 1, but I'm trying to get there. So we got a really fast closure rate coming. So I make one complete turn. I have no idea where Commander Hall is because his lights are out and we don't have any interface. And so I come wings level, and suddenly, after the first turn, suddenly the radar comes on. So now I got the cockpit indications, I got the warning lights, I got the strobe light, the strobe on the CRT telling me where that sand is. I can see it. It's at my 130. And but now the thing is halfway up. It's at 7,000 plus. There's no time to get locked onto it and try to fire. So I start in the second roll, and I hear Commander Hall say shotgun, which meant that he was firing his Shrike. Well, I didn't see any flame, so I thought a smart move. He's trying to shut down the radar because they knew exactly what we were doing. And so I continued the roll coming around, and I'm pumping off chaff on the side of the airplane here, which is tinfoil coming out of the back of the airplane. And it's supposed to drag the target off where I am at the time. So I'm completing the second roll, coming around again, and the missiles are coming right by me, and bam, it goes off behind me, behind my wing here. And I thought, oh, great, it hit the chaff, and we're good. But I look over, and Commander Hall's aircraft was perfectly formed A-7, but every inch of it was on fire. And I heard no beeper, nothing, indicating that he had ejected. So I called out his call sign 405, Sidewinder 405, check it. I kept doing it, and the airplane continued to fall to the ground, and he never checked in. So I went down and marked the spot, and made the call back to the ship that we lost. We had an emergency, and they sent out 2 more A-7s. I think they were A-6, 82, VA-82 aircraft, and we set up a listening watch to see if he came up. He never did, and after an hour and a half, we just said, okay, we're just going to listen to see if he does come up, and he ejected, and we didn't know it. But he never did, and we buried him in 2005.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So I think we lost a total of 6 crew members on that mission, that cruise. F4, and we lost an A-6. We lost 2 A-7s in our squadron, 2 A-6s in VA-82, and what else? There was I think there was another one.
How did the A-7 do after suffering damage? How did it fly, or how did it?
You have to ask these guys because I didn't get hit.
I think they did.
Dave did.
All I knew was that I was losing fuel. I had no sensation that any of the control surfaces were affected. I slowed down to conserve fuel, so I wasn't at high speed and high stress. I had no sensation that it wasn't going to fly well, other than I was going to run out of fuel.
And the method to get out of it was to eject. There was not really any other method to get out of an A-7.
Not that I was going to try.
Okay, that's kind of what I understood. So, very good. How was it to maintain? Was it well built, well constructed, and easy to deal with?
The aircraft itself or the system?
Both.
The systems were pretty reliable. Our issue, like they said, we didn't leave with 12
full system aircraft.
Mhm.
We left with some pretty good aircraft,
Mhm.
and most of them were on that flight. And when we ended up, when the war was over, we didn't have any lieutenant commanders left in the squadron. We went from commander to lieutenant, and that's who. Now we're sitting there waiting on replacement aircrafts. That night is all over. We're still flying. We're still putting stuff on the airplane. It's I guess it was a pretty good airplane. System-wise, we had the Echo system
Yeah.
in the Charlie aircraft. The Charlie aircraft didn't have a good engine because of an issue at the repair facility. Whoever did the repair facility on the engines had made an error. I don't know whether that's ever been said before or not. I don't have any idea. I don't know who did it. I just know it was. I currently work at NAS Jacks, FRC, and that's where this person was working whenever whatever happened.
Mhm.
So systems wise, we did extremely well for the whole cruise. Avionics wise, we were a pretty good aircraft. If they left with a full system, they did well with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
If you give you, anytime you were lunching junk, wasn't junk for these guys, but when we launched 50 airplanes at the same time, if this guy's got a good full system, this guy and this guy may just be flying off his.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say that from our training period at Fallon, I think our squadron average center of impact point with the systems that we're talking about here, inertial nav, was 3 meters, 9 feet to the center of impact with a 500-pound bomb. You know, that's less than distance to the door almost.
It's pretty good.
Oh.
So Fallon was
Great.
where you first encountered the A7?
Well, that's where we went for weapons training.
Okay. Where did you first get to fly the airplane?
Well, in the replacement air group, VA-174, and then my first active duty squadron was VA-86,
Okay.
the Sidewinders.
What radar system were you using?
126.
APQ 126?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. That's why they gave us the Echo system. That was APQ 126.
I worked on the 116.
That's what the Charlie went over there with.
Yeah, that was the best.
Did you first encounter the airplane in the same way?
Same 174.
Uh-huh.
One thing about the engine, while we had the TF-41 in the Echoes, I wasn't a very good carrier pilot, a lander anyway. I could take cat shots real good. But coming back in, it was a black night, and they waved me off, probably for a bad approach, I don't know. But they waved me off, and then when I came back around, at 600 feet, that's pretty exciting to be 600 feet out there over the water, flying the instruments. I came back around, and it was a pretty rough approach, but they took me. And I felt pretty good about it. Came back to the ready room, was waiting for the LSO to come down and debrief me, and I got a ream, and he chewed me up one side, down the other. And I said, "Why? What's wrong?" And he said, when you waved off that first time, he said, all I saw was sparks coming out of the engine. And he said, I was afraid that if you came back around and I had to wave you off again, the engine would seize. Well, when you land and clear the foul line and shut down after they park you, we had, I think it was 15 seconds. You had to punch the clock and watch and listen for the engine to decelerate or windmill for 15 seconds to let you know that everything's good with the bearings and everything. Well, as soon as I pulled the fuel off, it just seized. It just stopped. And so that's probably one of the things that made us go to B408s in Charlie, because of the veins were growing,
Yep.
it's stretching. That's what he saw.
Where did you first encounter the A7?
I had flown F-8s for about 2 years up at Oceana
Huh.
as an adversary pilot. When I came through, I was going F-8s to sea, and all of a sudden they weren't sending F-8s to sea, and so I ended up an adversary pilot, which was a very fun thing to do in an F-8 as a young guy. And then I went to A7s. I had a aversion to being responsible for other people's lives. So when I put in my what do you want to fly, and coming out of the flight training and even when the F-8s went away. I didn't want to fly a crewed airplane in case I was the screw up and cause somebody else's death. And so I stayed with the single seaters, and it made me less stressed about the flying.
Sure.
And I enjoyed the A-7s, a miniature F-8, just subsonic, a little fatter, and has an unusual nickname I'll just leave out of the video. But anyway, it was the F-8s, avionics were virtually obsolete when I was flying them. And to go into the A-7 was a good sized learning curve for a guy like myself. But I also a person that appreciated what the avionics would do for us.
Sure. So what y'all do after your tour was over?
I went back into engineering and managed to do well. I got involved with Civil Air Patrol after a while, and still am in Civil Air Patrol, and we don't get to fly very often in our part of the country, but right now we've got people that are doing aerial photography because of the storms and doing aerial locations. So I'm not recruiting, but it let me keep flying and letting the government pay for it.
Excellent. What did you do after your tour?
I went to B school.
Okay.
And,
So I'm thinking you stayed in the Navy a little while.
I stayed in the Navy 21 years and 7 months. After B school, I went to another A-7 squadron. I went to VA-86. Actually, it was kind of weird. I had started off in the wing airplane was a A3D. But when I got in a squadron, it was an RA-5C. So we had bunches and bunches and bunches of training. We changed from a bomber to a RA-5C. We were all of a sudden the missile guy. We pointed everything out. We didn't fly much bombing type missions. It was not that type of an aircraft any longer. The reason that I was told at the time, which I wasn't anybody that they talked to at the time, the reason I was told is that when you launched a practice, when you tried to practice bombing in an RA-5C, you dropped it was a little Mark 27, Mark something, it was a little bomb about this big. Because when you actually dropped a real bomb train out of that Vigilante, you were locked in something that was 70 feet long. And you were primarily doing it, from what I was told, you were primarily doing lock maneuvers. I don't know whether that's the way it actually rolled out or not. But that little bomb this long, taking the place of a 70-footer, is when they actually kind of decided to not fly them. We became strictly reconnaissance, and apparently we did our job pretty well. The avionics in that airplane was exceptionally good. That's when we got some of the good, everything was up to date. You were flying the maximum, the best. The A6 was good, better than the A5 they say, but the guys that I knew that fly the A5 said that the A6 couldn't compete with it. But the A6 kept shooting them out there, and the A5 just kept telling them where to shoot. So it was, I stayed in the A6, A5 squadron, and I got orders back to Memphis to teach. I went to Memphis as an E6, I left Memphis as an E8. It was about 4 years. I had less than 12 years in the Navy when I made it, but barely, like a month or so. And that was just not, I checked into a squadron, and it was RVH-5, and it turned out somehow or other that I was the senior person in khakis and the youngest person in khakis. Which brought on some issues that you don't normally think about so I had a a maintenance officer in '86 that had been on the, he was one of the pilots that brought over the replacement aircraft. So we're talking about the airplane one day, and I said, Mr. Nash, I think I can solve one of your problems for you. He said, do I have problems? I said, you got one you may or may not know about. He said, what's that? I said, I'm the senior invested in the squadron. And I'm also the youngest in the squadron. And I said, I don't think that the maintenance chief that flew the last go round would work for me. But I can work for him. So if you'll put me on the B shift and let me fly the second shift, I'll take care of that. Don't worry about that. I know how to do it. I've done it before. And I know I can work for him. I don't know whether he can work for me, but we'll try it that way. And if he sees this video, he's probably not gonna like me saying that. He probably don't even know I said that. Commander Nash knew, or Lieutenant Commander Nash knew that I said that. And he accepted my terms, and we were very successful as far as nighttime flights.
Yeah, good. Did you continue with the Navy?
Let's see, yeah, I went to Beeville, Texas as a basic jet instructor.
All right.
And in '76, the spring of '76, I trusted Christ as my Savior. And I decided I was not gonna fly anymore because I'd worshipped aviation, and I was not gonna date anymore because I'd been in the flesh. And so I prayed for my wife, if God wanted me to have a wife, and prayed for an occupation besides flying, and waiting on him to show me. So I met Christy in Fort Worth in the fall of '76, and in 12 days I asked her to marry me because we had the same background of drugs, immorality, and ungodly lifestyle. She found out about Mission Aviation Fellowship, so I had to go get my A&P license to maintain an airplane on the field overseas, wherever that was. And we ended up on the island of Borneo for 10 years flying general aviation with Mission Aviation Fellowship.
Oh, really?
And 3 of our 4 kids were born over there. And when we realized we were going to have to send them off to Singapore or some other international school, we didn't want to do that, so we came home in '91, and I started flying corporate aviation and tried to. Went to United one time, we call it, when you interview, and it was a horrible interview, so I never got to fly commercial, and I never got to fly a crop duster, which are the 2 things I'd really like to do. But I flew Lears and Gulfstreams and Falcons up until 2003, and then El Paso Natural Gas lost all their airplanes, so I went over to Pipeline Patrol and flew a Caravan, 200-foot waiver, 6,000 miles every month. Work 9 days, and then you're off the rest of the time except for working on maps and stuff. So I told my son, I said, boy, I hope you find a job like mine when you get out of A&M. He said, Dad, there's not a job like that out there where you can fly and work, a third of the month, work hard to a third of the month and love what you're doing. And so then we came up to Hot Springs Village after that because I couldn't find another job. So God blessed me with a career that some people don't get to enjoy. I mean, I loved every minute of it.
Neat, very neat. What'd you do?
Well, after leaving '86, I became a flight instructor, just like Art did in Kingsville, and I did that for 2 years. And then I got a job with American Airlines. I left the service. I stayed in the reserves, flew F-8s out of Andrews, photo F-8s and TA-4s. And but I got a job with American Airlines and flew with them for 29 years.
Well, we're really glad to have y'all at the Fort Worth Aviation Museum. We were excited to hear that some A7 people were coming, and hope y'all have had a good time in town, and hope y'all have had a good reunion, and look forward to y'all coming back again. We really appreciate the stories. Those stories are lost without us nailing them down and recording them, and we're just really appreciative of y'all coming in today. So thanks a lot, and y'all take care.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.